Hellmouth Con, Purple Prose, and this week's showcase, Catholic Schoolgirls versus Inbreeds. All that and more on this episode of the Indie Author Showcase. Welcome to the Indie Author Showcase, the podcast for indie authors by indie authors. I am your host, multi-award-winning author Chad Robert Morgan, and let's get into it. First, we were off last week because we were going to visit Hellmouth Con. What is Hellmouth Con? Hellmouth Con is a convention for Buffy the Vampire Slayer fans. If you watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer on TV, if you were a big fan, then this was the convention for you. It actually takes place in Torrance High School, which is the high school they filmed Buffy. So you could see some of the iconic locations that were visible in the TV series. Now, fairly recently, Anthony Heed, who starred in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, passed away, so there was a lot of tributes to Anthony Heed at this convention. I had, from a vendor standpoint, that's where I went. I went to check it out to see if this is a place that I wanted to vend at. And from a vendor standpoint, I was not overly impressed. I'm a little on the fence, and I'll tell you why. So, full disclaimer, my wife and I went there late Sunday afternoon. And they were looking at me like, you're buying your tickets now? They actually took pity on us and gave us a discount. Because they're like, this thing's almost over. So, I'm on the tail end of this thing. So, I'm not exactly catching it at its best. Just to be honest. They had taken over several rooms at the school. Like, they had a big auditorium where they were doing like speaker panels, and they actually had some kind of like comedy show they were doing. There's another group that was sitting around under a tree that was doing like some sort of like improv thing. I'm not sure. So there's still plenty of things going on if you're a hardcore fan. As a vendor, I went to the vendor spaces because I was looking for some friends of mine, and about half the gymnasium was taken over. Now the back row was where the celebrity autographing was happening, and most of which was not happening at the time because it was end of Sunday. But they had some major stars from the show, right? Amber Benson, Christina Carpenter, and so on. So, not just, guy who played victim number 3 in episode 7, some actual stars of the show. So, again, this was really good for the fans, but the auditorium was only about half filled with vendors, and it was pretty slow. Again, on a Sunday, last few hours of the convention, not totally unexpected, to be honest. I went there to check out a few friends of mine. Turns out, I had mentioned that our friend Casey Cordell was there, and she was doing great. So she was selling not only her books, but also Buffy merch. She stated in, I believe, one of her books in the about author section or something like that, that she was a big Buffy fan and was inspired by it. So that kind of quirky sense of humor is in her books. Friend of the show Raven Belasco was there because her books are, 1, they're about vampires, and 2, they're narrated by cast member Amber Benson. So she's actually having panel discussions with Amber Benson about her narrating her book. Also turned out, old friend of the show, Megan Haskell was there. And she was there with another friend of hers. So I got her book on my TBR list. And there was one other indie author I met there, and I got her book on my TBR list. So I got 2 new indie author books on the TBR. So not not a bad weekend, not a bad way to spend a few hours on a Sunday. The tickets, there was only 2-day passes. Like if you wanted to just go for Saturday, that wasn't available, which I thought was a little weird. So for my wife and I to both go, and again, they kind of took pity on us and gave us a discount. But we were still paying like for a full weekend for like 2 hours, which I thought was a little. But they were saying they handed us our little badge and we didn't have a lanyard, and they're like, well, we're out of lanyards. We did not expect as many people as we got, and we ran out. So take that for what it's worth, that they got more people in the door than they were planning. So again, like I said, I'm there late Sunday. What I saw didn't impress me, but I'm not seeing them at their best. And I'm just trying to do that to be fair to everybody. But I asked like Casey, what were the booth fees? Booth fees I mean, they're table fees. They're not really booths because it's a smaller space. But the table fees were very reasonable. So I'm a little on the fence because on the one hand, it's low cost of entry. I can get in there. I can sell some books. But on the other hand, I could probably break even at least or make a profit, right? Because again, it's why I do WonderCon. I don't sell well at WonderCon, but the table fees are so low that I don't have to in order to break even, and I actually can squeeze out a small profit because the cost of entry is so low, as opposed to like Monsterpalooza where I sell like gangbusters, but the cost of entry is so high that it eats up everything that I sell. So you got to kind of balance those things out. Hellmouth Con, I could probably get in there, sell, hopefully enough to make the table fee. Because again, I mean, it's like 8 hardcovers and I'm good, right? But I could probably earn more on that weekend just right around driving Uber. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to say because I wasn't there on Friday or on Saturday when things were really busy. So it's still a little hard to tell. I did pick up, I got to meet Raven. So we had her on the show. We interviewed her, but it was actually the first time I met her in person because she's on the East Coast. And she got us her new book right there. Dracula's Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Christmas. So this book looks like it's a lot of spicy fun. So we'll have to see. So that's, in a nutshell, is Hellmouth Con. Again, if you're a Buffy fan, go check it out. It's every year. If you are a general horror fan, I felt it was a little pricey not having single day tickets to get a lot out of that. So it is definitely, I felt, my personal opinion, it's definitely catering to the Buffy Joss Whedon fans. There were some Serenity stuff. There's one person doing like a Star Trek Federation thing. I was like, what the hell are you doing here? I don't know. Didn't figure that one out, but that's all right. But yeah, hardcore Buffy fan, Hellmouth Con, check it out. Rolling on, I want to talk a little bit about Purple Prose. And Purple Prose is kind of a thing because some people are, it's very subjective when it's Purple Prose, right? For example, when we were talking with Doug Brody about Shelley, and I was commenting about how crisp and clean and how economical he wrote Shelley, and he was saying, well, that was for the style of the book. You know, it was a sci-fi detective piece. Your main POV is an android. That person wouldn't use flowery language and Victorian language and that kind of thing. He says, when I'm writing horror, you need to be more visceral. You need to start adding the adjectives and start saying how, this was gooey and, the how that's creeped up your spine, and get all that kind of stuff in there. So what constitutes purple prose might shift depending on your genre and your writing style. With that said, I do think that there is still an argument to be made that you want to kill purple prose in your writing, because people are reading your book, they're trying to digest what they're reading, and if they have to really think hard, and I don't mean like they're actually reading your book, I mean you kind of expect them to do that, but I mean if it takes that much attention to kind of parse through the words to get to it, it's also a pacing issue. Let me talk about the pacing issue first, because that I think is a little easier to identify. The complete opposite of this was in my uncle's book, where he was talking about the main one of the main characters. He was dating this girl. They were fooling around. The brother has PTSD from World War One. He shows up with a shotgun. He tries to shoot the POV character, misses, hits his sister, and then, like, oh my god, what have I done? Turns around and pulls the shotgun on him. At no point in that passage does he actually say, he took the shotgun, put it in his mouth. No. All you really get is there was the pull of he heard the click of a trigger, red mist sprayed everywhere, because the POV isn't really caring about the brother. He's caring about the girlfriend who is shot. So, I mean, it was like 2-3 lines to basically say this guy shot himself, and at no point does he say he shot himself, right? It's all, I don't want to say implied, because it makes it sound more vague than it was, but he's showing us that he shot himself. He's never telling us that he shot himself. And it is so economical that when I first read it, and I'm like speed reading, and I had the, what? And I go back a few pages, and I reread it, and I'm like, oh, I get it now. His book was very easy to read because it was so economical in the words. You know, he didn't hold your hand. There was a blast from the shotgun. He slumped to the floor. That was it. That was all he said. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the book in front of me. But that's like all he said to indicate that he put the gun into his own mouth and fired. If anything, my uncle was a little too economical. He swung the pendulum to the opposite extreme of what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying he did. I'm saying you can make that argument. Because if you are reading so fast that, you like one sentence, he turned the gun on himself, that would have made that section like crystal clear. I mean, it was still clear, but I mean, it would have been without debate what happened. What I'm talking about is complete opposite of that, where you are so holding the reader's hand, the reader is getting frustrated. So, something along the lines of, Carol rolled her eyes and sighed. She was so frustrated with him. Yeah, I got that from the eye rolling and the sighing, right? You don't need to say that. Another example of what really can drag your writing down is adverbs. And I've said this before, anything that ends in ly, you should pretty much cut it, right? 90% of the time you can cut it. And again, an example of this, guy gets his head crushed and the eyeball was dangling grotesquely from his skull. And I'm like, well, I mean, is an eyeball going to dangle any other way? I mean, it is going to be gross. I think that's implied. The only time I would want to use an adverb there is if it was counter to what is implied. Like maybe the person who crushed the skull is, like Art the Clown, and he's like really psychotic. And then, the eyeball dangled comically, like it, oh, and he starts playing with it, because that would be weird, right? That's not what we, the reader, would probably think of when we see a head get crushed and an eyeball pop out and starts dangling on the optic nerve. We're like, yeah. But he's like, cat toy, that kind of thing. Then it makes sense to throw in an adverb. But if somebody is running quickly, that is usually how you run. We don't need the quickly. It's another word for the reader to get through to continue on to the story. It's a speed bump. And we want to get rid of the speed bumps. So let's move on to that, to actual purple prose, which is basically when you are filling the paragraph with so many adjectives that it's nothing but speed bumps, right? It forces the reader to slow down. And it's not always a bad thing, right? Sometimes you want to slow the reader down, right? I mean, especially when you're writing horror. I write horror. When I do ISF, purple prose is usually gone because I'm just trying to get to the next joke, right? Sometimes like, oh, you should have more description of the ship. And I said, no, it's not important. It doesn't care what the ship looks like. If it doesn't feed into the story, it doesn't care that there's a circuit panel here or a conduit here. What was more important is I line up the next joke and I get to the next joke. Because ISF is a comedy, right? It's a sci-fi comedy in the vein of like, those really gratuitous 80s comedies that I grew up with, right? What if Porky's but in space, that kind of thing. So the purple prose has got to go. There can't be any purple prose in ISF. When I'm writing horror and you have the monster attacking somebody, that becomes a different vibe. And what works for that, what doesn't work for ISF could work for, say, Fear, where you are, have the giant cat monster coming after Diego, right? And he's describing this cat monster because we want that cat monster. We want to feel the fear. We want to see the smile that is literally reaching from ear to ear, and how every single one of those triangular teeth are glinting in the light. And I just wrote a passage for a piece that I'm working on. Like, one of the cliche is a predatory grin, and then I write, yeah, he had a predatory grin. And I'm like, no, that wasn't right. Predators kill for food. This was a grin that said he killed for the pleasure of it. So this is beyond predatory. This is psychotic, right? That kind of stuff can elevate a horror scene. So is it purple prose? It depends on where you're writing it. But again, I would always come back to, are we moving the story forward the way we wanted to? You don't want the reader having to wade through adjectives and adverbs to get to, and again, it's hard to explain because it is kind of a judgment call. But I would say you need to pick and choose what's important. And if it's something that is very, very visceral, something that's very, very, that you want the reader to slow down and feel. And it doesn't have to be horror. It could be like, say, erotica, right? Look at 50 Shades of Grey. The two MCs dealing with work shit, not really what the readers are to read about, right? Cut the purple prose, get through it as efficiently as you can. Now the two characters are getting on, now we can get some purple prose in there. We want to slow things down. We want to savor that because that is what the reader's here to get. Sci-fi. Let's look at Project Hail Mary. Grace first wakes up. We wanted to talk about how he feels and his confusion and everything like that. Once things get going, let's, we've established where he's at. We have established he doesn't know how he got there. Now let's get things going. And then we meet Rocky. Okay, let's slow down again. Let's talk about this very tense meeting of two different alien species. Right? Grace has no idea what he's looking at. He just knows it's another species because Earth didn't send two ships. And, a lot of this back and forth of, oh my God, are they going to blow me out of the sky? Are they peaceful? What the hell's going on? I don't know. This is a research ship. This is not the Enterprise. He's not going to fire photon torpedoes at the thing. Right? He is completely unarmed and defenseless. And just that slow buildup as they work towards building up a level of communication takes chapters of the book. Once they've established that they can communicate and they can work together and they're on the same ship. Okay, well, let's start speeding things up again. Okay, we got the mission. We're going to go here. We're going to do this. Now you're doing the action-packed thing where you're sending the probe down that collects samples and everything like that. Oh, we want that rapid fire because, it's exciting and everything like that. We want to kill the purple prose at that point, right? Because it's adventure. It's fast. It's hitting, boom, boom, boom. So you pick and choose your battles when it comes to purple prose. And you have to ask yourself, or better yet, have a beta reader, right? Which is, I'm still struggling to find good beta readers. Myself, it's a thing. But if you can find a good beta reader, you're solid. But have them read your stuff and look for any of these redundancies. When I send my stuff to my editors, there's two I work with. And when I'm doing my hardcore horror stuff, I work with Liam Ford, who's very, very good and very, very expensive. And which is why I don't use him for everything. And he'll redline all through the book, and he'll leave notes saying like, yeah, you've already established this. We know he's frustrated. We get that from the context, right? Pull it out. We know who you're talking. You don't have to name that it's Trevor. We know it's Trevor because you identified him in the previous chapter, and we haven't switched POV, so you're fine. You don't have to say Trevor said this, or you're good. Cut that out. That kind of thing. That is so helpful because, again, it's always a balance, right? The author has the idea in his head, and he's trying to convey it to somebody else by putting it on paper. And if he overshares, the reader is going to struggle to keep up because he's got to wade through all the extra fluff. If you don't put enough, the reader is not going to understand what's happening, and he's going to get frustrated and quit. So it's this balancing act. And purple prose is what happens when it's out of balance, and you're giving more words to describe a situation that you really need. And some people say that the purple prose it's when the author's trying to sound like he's an author, and he's trying to he's abusing his thesaurus. And I'm like, I don't know if that's true. I think it could be just that he is trying to convey every single nuance and emotion of the scene to the point where there's some redundancy. And I think we need to trim out the redundancy. And I think if you do that in your work, it's going to be way more solid. As somebody whose editor redlines the crap out of his books, that's where I'm coming from. So why are we talking about Purple Prose today? Well, let's get on to this week's showcase. Ready, set, kill. It is Catholic Schoolgirls versus Inbreeds, the first book in the slasher universe, by Todd Anthony Nunez. So let's start with the back of the book. In 1972, deep in the Appalachian wilderness, a bus carrying Catholic schoolgirls and their nun chaperone, Sister Lucy, is lost and stranded in the foreboding woods of West Virginia. The travelers are cut off from civilization, isolated in hostile terrain. The forest harbors dark secrets, and they are not alone. A clan of cannibalistic mountain men, grotesquely disfigured by generations of inbreeding, lurk in the shadows. Driven to the brink of extinction by their own sterility, they hunt for outsiders to sustain their bloodline, focusing on the busload of women they believe can save them. The girls, unprepared and terrified, must rely on Sister Lucy's guidance to survive. As the clan launches a brutal attack, the girls are transformed from helpless innocents into fierce survivors. With the relentless cannibals closing in, the battle for survival turns the forest into a blood-soaked battleground where the line between prey and predator blurs, and each side fights desperately for their idea of family. Okay, that's the book in a nutshell. Let's start with, what did I like about it? First of all, the concept is freaking fantastic, right? If you are a horror fan, group of 18-year-old schoolgirls, which in of itself sort of has a certain Pavlovian response, if you know what I mean. You're like, school, hey. And then you have Inbreeds, which is the complete opposite of that. It starts off with a very strong first chapter or prologue where basically we're seeing that, yeah, they can't procreate anymore. They've been inbreeding for so long that the genetics just don't work anymore, and everything is stillborn. So they need fresh DNA in their gene pool. And here comes this school bus full of very young, healthy women. So, yeah. Another thing that I liked about this is that I mentioned before about killing off a character and not caring about the character, right? Like, perfect example that I use all the time was the original Transformers. They killed Jazz. Jazz had about maybe 3 lines of dialogue. It wasn't even framed dramatically. It was like this big old huge far away shot. And then at the end, like, Optimus Prime says, "We won today. Your buddy's dead. I didn't know him, and it's okay. It's fine. Let's go. Celebration." That kind of thing. If you're going to kill somebody, make me care that you're going to kill them in a book. Not in real life. Don't kill anybody in real life, but in your story. And what was really good about this book is he gave you just enough. He fleshed out the characters just enough that you kind of felt for every person on that bus when their time comes. It's not like they did this huge Musketeer roll call and you got to know everybody immediately and you had this whole cast of characters. No, he doles it out very intelligently. There's one point where there's the popular girl and she's got a couple of cronies, and we see that dynamic a little bit, and then she's like, "Oh, my cronies will do this task. They'll go look for the firewood," right? This is before they know that they're in trouble. So he actually spends about a page or two giving them some life, right? That they don't just gossip with the popular girl. They gossip about the popular girl when she's not there, and they're like, "Oh yeah, she's such a bitch," and everything like that. And you're starting to feel for these characters and they're basically red shirts, right? Um, their life expectancy was like in paragraphs at this point, and but I cared about them. I cared about them more than I ever cared about Jazz in the first Transformers movie, right? So he did an excellent job of and in fact, if anything, there's one pair of characters. I think he waited a little too long before he started getting us a little bit of backstory. Like that could have come in a little bit sooner, and it would have felt a little less kind of dropped in. But it still worked because it was early enough. It wasn't like 5 minutes before they died. I mean, they were around for paragraphs. So I'm like, okay, that works. But I think that could have been a little bit sooner. But there was enough meat on these bones that when they were bit into, you felt it. I thought he did an excellent job in that. And this is a huge cast. I mean, this whole bus gets attacked. A lot of red shirts. Let's just put it that way. And they're either nameless red shirts that just go off, but you know, like I said, some of them you cared about, and he did a great job of doing that. And when you get to the horror part, that's when it really works, right? You know, you're dealing with you know, fighting this deformed mutant, you know, hills have eyes kind of thing. That was visceral. That really worked for me. So what are the parts that didn't work for me quite as well? The first would be his writing style. I felt was very purpley, if that makes any sense. Now, it wasn't a bad thing, right? When he's talking about, you know, this guy in an arena and he's fighting off these inbreeds, you wanted that purple prose, if that makes any sense. I mean, technically you never want purple prose, but you know what I mean. You want that, you want the extra words. You want to be able to feel the punches, and you want to hear the bone crunching. You want to smell the blood being spilled on the floor, all that kind of stuff. When you have a couple of girls talking about the problems between their parents, not so much. You know, it was the same writing style, but it wasn't the same. How do you want to? Didn't have the same momentum. Didn't have the same gravitas. It wasn't as a. I don't want to say it wasn't an important scene, because it was important to the story, but it didn't have the same kind of adrenaline level, and yet we're still, you know, feeling every syllable that they're talking about, and it's just like, I get it. Let's speed run through this thing a little bit, okay? When it came to monsters and schoolgirls fighting each other, yeah, the writing worked. The writing worked great. When it came to, you know, girl confessing that, you know, why she had a fallout with her father, it was a little melodramatic. And maybe you want melodramatic because they are Catholic schoolgirls. Maybe that feeds into that. I don't know. But for me, that slowed things down. And that was where I was struggling to keep going with the book. That's where I wanted to put the book down. And I was like, you know, I'm going to keep on going, because at some point the bad guys are going to show up, and we're going to have some more violence, and we're going to have some more horror elements. And then we get there, and I'm like, yes, okay, now we're cooking, now we're going, now I'm into it, now I'm back on board. And there were just times in the book where, like I said, somebody would go, he rolled their eyes, she was disgusted with this. I was like, I got that. Cut the sentence. I don't need you to hold my hand. I get that she's upset. I get that she's bored. I get that she's grossed out. You know, the eyeball that dangled grotesquely. I get that it's gross. It's supposed to be gross. It's her boyfriend's eyeball shooting across the room or something like that. You know, I get that. And keep in mind, when I'm describing these things, I'm paraphrasing. They're not actually necessarily things that happen in the book, but things like that happen in the book. Let's put it that way. I don't think I'm spoiling things. But those were the kind of things where it dragged it for me. And I just wanted to hit the fast forward button on the audiobook and just scrub through it. So I liked the book. I wanted to like it a lot more than I did. And it is, I mean, it's a cool concept. It's executed in terms of the plotting and the pacing very well. But just, some of that prose got a little purple in some places, and I just, oh man, I just wanted to start redlining some things. That would have just made it go so much smoother and be even more enjoyable than it really is. I mean, currently right now it's a 4.3 on Amazon. It's got some a decent number of reviews for an indie book. It is a good, strong book if you're into horror. Just keep in mind that you're going to have to get your purple prose hip waders on in a few places, more than a few places. So that's it for this week's showcase. Let me know what you think about the whole intro, what I like, what I didn't like structure. I'm thinking about doing that more often. I think that'll give the show a little bit more form instead of me, a little more form and structure, a little less me rambling. Now, I think that'll help the show a little bit. Also, keep in mind, we are 3 weeks until Creep IE Aftermath, where you can see me in person. You can get my books. You can get my books autographed. You can see some of my 3D printed monsters. You can take some of my 3D printed monsters home for the right price. Coming out the Creep IE Aftermath, get your autographed copy of Fear on sale right now. Fear, group of kids in a small desert town that realize that the urban legend might not be a legend after all, as their worst fears come to life. Come check us out, and until then, keep on reading.